Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is September 6th, 2022, and this is your daily Ukraine update. And we are going to be asking, has Ukraine already gotten some major breakthroughs? Let's take a look. So when we look at the map, we can see there's been updates in a few places, mostly based on what Russia has said they have lost, and not so much what Ukraine has reportedly captured. But as we can see here, we looked yesterday at the fairly easy target of Blahodavivka, and now you can see that Ukrainian forces have been able to push their own salient out at Sukhoi Stavok. They haven't seized it necessarily, but Russians have reported losing it. So this is significant, of course, because as you can see, the river here, I don't even know if it's big enough to be a river, canal, stream. This is a natural obstacle that you can see the front line has kind of stuck to, and Ukrainian forces have critically pushed past this and are starting to make real gains into this territory here. As you can see, it is roughly halfway between Mykolaiv and Nikopol. To the north, you can see there's also been Russian withdrawals from Novovoznensky. I apologize to all my Ukrainian friends for my questionable pronunciation. I speak no Slavic languages. But you can see here that Ukrainian forces are actually pushing back and making some gains along this front as well. What's more interesting to me, we've talked about what I think is going on here. I think this multi-axis of advance is going to try to force the Russians into a devil's choice where they can only use their remaining reserve forces to reinforce one of potentially 3 or 4 different axes. Once they choose to reinforce one axis, the Ukrainian forces will double down on the now more vulnerable other axis of advance. So I think this is still a shaping operation that we're looking at. But when we look to the north, we can see we're getting a sense just how much the Russian forces, how thin they are stretched at this point. Because as you can see, Russians have reported losing a significant chunk here at Spirne. And this is significant because, as you can see, yesterday, Ukrainian forces actually seized a sort of salient, a literal beachhead, or a bridgehead on Ozerne. And this is interesting, of course, because as you can see, the Seversky Donetsk River forms a natural front line that it has been very difficult for Russian forces to cross, but the Ukrainians have managed to successfully establish a bridgehead here. So it'll be really curious to see if this is exploited. Exploiting is the term for making a tactical gain and turning it into a strategic gain. And you can see here at Spirne, there's also been some offensive rollbacks. So this will be really interesting to see. I suspect that these are targets of opportunity. This is Ukrainian forces seeing where the Russians have withdrawn their forces to dangerously low levels and are taking advantage of that tactical weakness. It makes sense. This is all fairly recently seized territory, so Russians may not have the logistic systems or the defensive systems, defensive infrastructure to really turn this into a knockdown, drag-out fight. So that's why I think you're likely to see continual territory shifts here as Russia has to, again, make these only bad choices between the defending territory it's already held, repelling Ukrainian counteroffensives, and continuing to seize the territory that they desire near Donetsk. So all in all, guys, this is good news for Ukrainian forces. I think this offensive can more or less appears to be going to plan. In other news, of course, Russia had wanted to stage a sham referendum in Kherson where they would probably declare independence, and conveniently everyone would vote to become a part of the Russian Federation. Of course, if you know exactly how you need to vote if you don't want to end up in a Russian prison cell. So I think that the fact that has been delayed due to security concerns is probably an indicator that the Russian forces, the Russian occupation forces in these regions are really not established and are sort of flying by the seat of their pants. Remember, Kherson has been under control for almost 6 months, and this referendum has probably been part of the overarching plan for some time now, for several months. So the fact that it's already delayed due to ongoing fighting is probably an indicator that this plan was never that solid to begin with. And the people running it are probably, well, they're probably buffoons. And I don't say that to be insulting. I say this from my own experience in Afghanistan, where we too had to create an entire new government from scratch, right? The US refused to use old Taliban associated politicians or governors. And the US also just had absolutely no idea that there was existing political leadership in Afghanistan through the tribal mechanisms, right? The tribes, sub-tribes, ethnic groups. That's how society is organized. So the US, being ignorant to that, ended up recruiting the only people they could find who would do the jobs of governor, police chief, etc. And oftentimes they were liars, frauds, criminals, people who had been ostracized from the existing power structure. And that is probably what I suspect, what Russia may be relying on in Kherson, right? Kherson had a functioning government under Ukraine, and most of those Ukrainians have either probably fled, been arrested, or have been killed. And so who are you going to be left with? You're going to be left with people who have no loyalty to Ukraine as a country, who have no problem working with occupation forces, and of course are just sort of hungry for power, and people who if the general society says it's not acceptable to become a member of the Russian occupied government, you're only going to be able to find people who aren't really that closely tied to society. Again, criminals, sort of sociopaths, drunks, that sort of ilk. And so that's who I think is probably running the governance in all these occupied areas. Anyway, guys, just a theory. But it's not a theory, is where to find the combat videos that YouTube says need to be censored. That's right. On the Patreon, I'm doing the combat video breakdowns of all of the videos that YouTube really doesn't have. This is the most intense tier of combat video that I can find. And of course, thank you to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys make this possible. Thanks to all my patrons. The link is in the description, and I will catch you guys in the next one.